If you want to be the best dynasty manager you can be, there's one really important trait that you have to nail: selling players at the right time. Now's the time to evaluate your rosters, decide what you need to do, and it's time to move on from those players who are going to decrease in value. I'm going to give you 5 players you should be moving on from right now. I'll tell you what they're worth, what you might be able to trade them for. Stick around if you want to start building your team into a title winner today. Ever since Geno Smith signed the contract extension, it's been downhill. Things haven't gone very well for him. And now Pete Carroll's gone. Just as I was about to hit record button tonight, Pete Carroll, he's out. He's going to be an advisor to the team. But the warning signs are massively there on Geno Smith. This year, he only had 4 games over 20 fantasy points this year. He only had 7 games where he passed for more than 1 touchdown in that game. Last year, he had 12 of those. Last year, he only had 1 finish outside the top 20 quarterbacks each week. This year, he had 4, even with Jackson Smith and Jigba added to the mix. This was supposed to be a group of wide receivers who were just going to be a nightmare for opposing defenses to match up against. They were going to be good on both the outside, up the seam. They were going to be good in the slot. It was going to be everything. And yet everything regressed. Geno had 140 yards per touchdown last year. This year, 190. His completion rate under pressure last year was 58%. This year, 51%. His completion rate dropped as well by 5% in general, from 69.8% last year to 64.7%. Everything went wrong. And now a new head coach is going to be coming in there. It really is the time to try and move on from Geno before his value craters. These are our values on Geno Smith as things currently stand. And you can see we've got our values up at the top, and then we've also got FantasyPros value below. So we value Geno a 24 early second right now. In single quarterbacks leagues, you'd be looking at a 25 third. It just isn't worth it. You need a real difference maker in single quarterback leagues. So these kind of players like Geno, there's just no need for those to be on your roster unless you're talking about a depth or a second or a third quarterback. In Superflex, though, you can see we're below Fantasy Pros. They're currently valuing him at 107. We think that you should be, looking at the early second price for him right now. These are players I would happily go out and take over Geno Smith right now. Zamir White, you could do that trade straight up, and I think that'd be smashed accept on both sides, even though there's going to be so much more doubt about what's going on with Geno Smith now. Jalen Warren and a 3rd round pick in exchange for Geno Smith. Love that. Or Chris Godwin straight up. If you're looking to just move some of the value around from your dynasty roster, if you're saying, okay, well, I've got a little too much tied up in quarterback, wide receiver is always a great place to invest. We know the Bucks currently don't have Mike Evans under contract for next year. Chris Godwin got really hot to end the year. We saw him really develop a bond with Baker Mayfield down the stretch. I love making that trade. Before we get to the next player, I need you to help me as I try to help you. 90% of you watching this channel are not subscribed. I know you're enjoying the content. I know that you like it. You're hitting those thumbs up down below. But hit subscribe if you want to win your Dynasty League this year. We've got so much rookie content coming your way. Mock drafts starting from next week. We will get you up to speed with all these rookies and ready to crush your drafts in 2024. Next up, it's Tua Tagovailoa, another quarterback who regressed. And part of his regression came because what Miami Dolphins running backs did this year. Last year in 2022, they scored 12 touchdowns as a unit. This year, running backs for the Dolphins scored 34 touchdowns, and that just ate into what Tua was doing. So even though Tua threw more touchdowns this year, he threw 29 versus 25 the previous year. He was throwing them at a slower rate than he was in 2022 because he actually stayed healthy this year and played in every game. So even though he's thrown more, it didn't really help us out. He had 7 top 12 quarterback finishes this year, which isn't great. And in 18 of the last 22 games, he's finished with less than 20 points. The Dolphins were an efficient offense. Everything just, the big plays are fantastic. But it's very rare that he has these huge blow-up days because everything is done so efficiently. And the running game isn't something that's going to stop being a part of Mike McDaniel's offense. He's going to want to work around that constantly. So much of Tua's dynasty value is tied to Tyreek Hill. If Tyreek Hill retired tomorrow, how much does Tua's value just drop straight away? So in terms of fantasy value, this is where we've got Tua right now. In Superflex time premium leagues, we'd class him as the 102 in 2024 draft picks. Single quarterback, that drops slightly to 104. You can see we're really closely aligned with Fantasy Pros. They've got him at 102 as well. And then keep trade cut. Already, the public perception of Tua is dropping down just a little bit to the 105. Now, I know what you're going to say. Keep trade cut values fluctuate and they're not the most reliable, but it's a good way to get an idea of what the wider audience is thinking about Tua and comparing them to what we value him at and what other sites like Fantasy Pros value him at give you a good idea of the range which you should be sending trade offers for. In terms of trades I do to sell Tua right now, I would sell him for the 104 plus an early second. I think that might be a bit of a struggle at this time of year, though, because people love their draft picks. And until people get an idea of exactly what's going on there, then it can be a bit tricky. But if you can get that 104 plus an early second, that's absolutely a deal I'd do. Brees Hall, I would sell Tua straight up for Brees Hall, but you don't have to. I think you can get a mid-second back on top of that. If there's a team who are looking like they need to rebuild, they realize we don't have the quality, and it's time to move on from a running back, which we talk about a lot, then have the conversation. Ask them what the price is on Brees Hall. Would they take Tua? You might be surprised. I would also trade Tua straight up for Kyler Murray. We know Kyler Murray is going to be in Arizona next year now. They've committed to him. They seem very pleased with what they saw from him this year. Kyler Murray's fantasy floor is so much higher than Tua's simply because he gives the rushing component. And next year, he's going to be a year further removed from his ACL injury. We saw him scampering around this year, and he looked good with it. And if they can get him some weapons, some better wide receivers, a healthy Marquise Brown, Trey McBride for a full season, then Kyler Murray could absolutely outscore Tua. Next up, it's Christian McCaffrey. And I know that this one is going to be a bridge too far for some people. But running backs, unless you're absolutely positive that you can really seriously contend in 2024, is this the last opportunity you're going to get to sell high on Christian McCaffrey? We know Father Time is undefeated. We just saw Sneckler go off the absolute cliff edge when it came to just that point in running back career where, around that sort of 28 age season, so many running backs previously, they just hit it and the end is not pretty. Yes, he had an incredible season. He had 5.2 targets per game, 16 red zone targets. Kyron Williams was the only other running back with more than 11. And CMC did all this with 5.4 yards per carry. His previous career high was 5.0 back in 2019. So the good news is the value that you're getting for McCaffrey, it's not like Eckler or some of these other running backs where right now you're really desperately just trying to get whatever you can for him. But CMC, the Niners really worked him this year. There's a good chance that next year he's not going to deliver to this sort of MVP standard level that he set this year. So it might just be time to start looking at, can you pivot to a younger option or diversify some of the value that's in CMC right now into other assets in your roster? In terms of trade value, here at Fantasy Sanctuary, we're a little bit lower than the rest. Fantasy Pros have them at the 101. Keep trade cut at the 103, and we're at the 104 right now. So it's not a huge difference. We're just already kind of baking in that fact that, you might not have that long left to sell high on him. In terms of trades that you could do for CMC right now, I would take the 109 and the 111 together. You could package that up and be sending it to a contender, somebody who just, they came so close. If you got the 111, there's a good chance that you came runner-up in your 2023 final. Now, what missing piece do they need? Okay, somebody like CMC. Maybe they can believe that that's going to be the missing piece for them and it's going to tide them over. I would take Puka Nacua straight up, but you can probably get a third on top of Puka Nacua for that. Or I would take Trey McBride and a second, preferably like a mid-second rather than a late one. But Trey McBride is definitely an ascending talent. Talked about it on the Dynasty Buys video, which is linked in the description below. Alvin Kamara had a far better season than pretty much anyone expected. He finished as the RB3 in PPR points per game, RB9 in total points. And you go back to last offseason, I wasn't particularly high on Kamara. I thought that missing 4 games to start the season would be a real problem for him. I thought that Kendry Miller would be a problem for him, and Jamal Williams would be a problem for him. But thanks to Kendry Miller with nagging injuries and then Jamal Williams picking up injuries, when Alvin Kamara came back from suspension, he had an absolute clear path and he started really hot. He had 6 top 12 finishes in his first 7 games, and it looked like he was just going to blow the doors off everything. But then down the stretch, the wheels came off a little bit. From week 9 onwards, he finished outside the top 12 running backs in 6 of 8 games. That's not what you're looking for at the position. It kind of speaks to the running back position as a whole, how Kamara was able to have that much of a average finish to the year, but still finish as the RB3 in points per game and RB9 in total points. The Saints, they've got a lot to figure out this offseason. They are 72 million over the cap. It's every year this is an issue for them. Every year they work to get back under it. But Alvin Kamara, he's got no guaranteed money remaining. The Saints could save $12 million by cutting him as a post June 1st cut. Kendry Miller, it didn't happen for him this year, but they'll be expecting more from him next year. Jamal Williams, cutting him wouldn't save any money. They'd save like $700,000. And we saw this week how much the team loved Jamal Williams to the point where they were willing to defy the head coach and get him a touchdown on the victory formation. So out of the 3 of them, Alvin Kamara's job feels the least secure, adding to the fact that he turns 29 in July. And the warning signs are definitely there, even though he had a good season. You can see there's a big range of values on Alvin Kamara. We value him at the 202. Keep Trade Cut value him at the 205. And FantasyPros still value him at the 111. Being able to play these values off against each other is absolutely crucial to making good trades. Having a look around at what other people value players at, you could potentially get the 111 out of somebody, or you could get the 205. So it's worth having these conversations and saying, look, Alvin Kamara's on the block, but don't do it in just such an obvious way. Do it in a way where it's like, look, I've got a few players who I might be willing to part with. Which of these players takes you fancy? Rather than just going, look, I want to sell Alvin Kamara, because then everybody knows you just try to sell him cheap. Players I would trade or trades I would do for Alvin Kamara right now, Daniel Jones. Like, if you're selling a running back, what better asset to acquire than a quarterback? Daniel Jones' price is going to increase in value between now and the season. The Giants are pretty much stuck with him for this year. We know they've given the head coach another year in New York, tied to Daniel Jones. Maybe in a year's time, things are different, but Daniel Jones is going to be a starter this year. Mike Evans, yes, he's going to be a free agent. Already talked about the fact that he might not be back with the Bucks, but Mike Evans absolutely still has it. And if Mike Evans left Tampa, where's he going to go? Like, what's going to be worse for him than Baker Mayfield? Yes, Baker Mayfield played well this year, but I believe Mike Evans can be fantasy gold with pretty much any quarterback. Or if you wanted to pay up a bit more, which sometimes is the easier way to do it, add a late second round pick on top of Alvin Kamara to get Jackson Smith and Jigba. Talk about an ascending talent. Everybody's expecting a big second year out of him. Before we get to player number 5, if you want complete access to all our premium Dynasty tools, including trade values, trade calculator, roster review tools, with Dynasty Survival Kit in all its glory, not to mention our rookie guide, it's going to be over 200 pages of content, getting you set for those rookie drafts, hit the join button down below. You'll get access to the Discord where our members get unfiltered access to mine and Rich's opinions. There's startups happening in there, orphans being posted, trade queries, everything you could want for less than the price of a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Amari Cooper, he's coming off a great season. I don't think anyone was really expecting him to do what he did, particularly down the stretch with Joe Flacco. And so much of that success was tied to Joe Flacco and how much he was passing a ball at a really high rate. Flacco was absolutely dealing on play action. Everything was clicking. And Flacco averaged 323 passing yards per game compared to Deshaun Watson, who was averaging 185. Everything was going right for Flacco. He had a 44% completion rate on deep balls. Watson, 34%. Flacco, 5 games, 8 sacks. Watson, 17 sacks in 6 games. The magic that Joe Flacco was bringing is not necessarily something that we're going to be seeing from Deshaun Watson, who absolutely has not lived up to that contract and looks like the worst signing in the NFL in history. Cooper, he's 29, entering the last year of his deal. He's got zero guaranteed money. The Browns, they're going to be heavily over the cap, and they need to save money. They're projected to have the seventh fewest cap space at the minute, with 12 million over. They could save $20 million against the cap by cutting him as a post-June 1st cut. So there's definitely a realistic scenario where Amari Cooper is not on the team this year. And if he's not on this team, is he going to walk into a situation where he's still the wide receiver one? He's getting up there in age, and now is the time where you might still be able to get a really good value on him after he's just gone crazy down the stretch. In terms of trade values, we see Amari Cooper as the 111. Keep trade cut value him slightly lower at the 203, so you can see that public perception is already starting to dip on him. And then down at the bottom, you've got FantasyPros who, like us, see him as the 111. Trade offers you could be making right now: send Amari Cooper straight up for Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is absolutely going to be a starting quarterback in this league next year. There's every reason to believe he should be fine coming off the Achilles injury. And Kirk Cousins is going to be in demand if he's not back with the Vikings. You could add a third on top of Amari Cooper to get up to Rashee Rice. I think that's a deal which seems really intriguing to me. Rashee Rice looks fantastic down the stretch, was a complete red zone weapon for the Chiefs. And if Travis Kelce retires, what kind of target share are we going to end up seeing for Rashee Rice in 2024? Or the last one, you could trade Amari Cooper for Chris Godwin and a third-round pick. Again, playing into the idea, okay, if Mike Evans leaves Tampa, what's the future going to look like for Chris Godwin? How many receptions is he going to get per game? It could be really fruitful. Those are your Dynasty Sell Now players. Check the description below for players you should be trading for right now. That video is exactly the same as this one. Hit that like button, subscribe for loads more Dynasty content. We will help you win leagues in 2024.